אבל אנחנו שולטים על גובה הלהבות.
Making it happen. Thank you.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
Is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
I'm pro-genocide. Like, it sounds really shitty, but like, I think that Israel should just draw up its fucking borders about where it is now. Palestinians can go live in another place.
I am not afraid. What is my nation?
May Allah awaken the people and help them to see the evil doings of Israel and the United States.
Since October 7th, 2023, the Zionist propaganda machine has been toiling non-stop to justify the genocide Israel is currently committing. Some of their propaganda has done nothing but show the absolutely vile side of Zionism. From laughing on TikTok about blockading Gaza's water and electricity, mocking Palestinians being murdered, or just yelling at halal card vendors to gloat about the murder of thousands of Palestinian children.
If we killed 4,000 Palestinian kids, you know what? It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough.
The Zionists aren't sending their best, but some of their propaganda sticks. When you're vomiting out volumes of Hezbollah, US politicians and the mass media run over each other to find the chunkiest bits and regurgitate it without a critical thought. Even old Genocide Joe took a break from sniffing the nearest child to reiterate that he had personally seen evidence that Hamas beheaded babies.
See and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
This, of course, was a lie, but who's gonna talk? Certainly not him.
We finally beat Medicare.
Conservatives and liberals who used to be free speech advocates now go Super Saiyan the moment you say anything critical about Israel. They know that their narrative is falling flat, so they've resorted to simply arresting, beating up, and deporting people who disagree with them. They'll smear you as an anti-Semite or terrorist and intimidate you for daring to speak up about what you can see with your own eyes, that Israel's committing a genocidal campaign of extermination against Palestinians. The entire political establishment, the Zionist lobby, an army of disinformation peddlers, and a legion of slop streamers all stand with Israel, ready to destroy anyone who speaks up. Who can stand up to that? Only someone with absolutely no self-preservation or regard for the reputation would. Get out your watermelons and red triangles, let's tear down some Zionist talking points. On March 10th, 2003, 10 days before the invasion of Iraq, the lead singer of the American country band, the Dixie Chicks, spoke up against the war.
Just so you know, we're on the good side with y'all. We do not want war. We're ashamed of the President of the United States.
In response to this anti-war statement, they were blacklisted by country radio stations, had their CDs destroyed by protesters, lost sponsors, received death threats, and faced a barrage of right-wing smears. This was the reality after 9/11. Anyone who expressed any opposition to the Iraq War was cancelled by the soy right mob. Even a Texas country band of mostly blonde white women suddenly became the terrorist chicks because they dared to speak up against famous peacemaker George Bush. Everyone knows the story of post-9/11 terrorist hysteria. The US government used it to strengthen the surveillance state, restrict citizens of civil liberties, and ostracize anyone who spoke up against a war that killed hundreds of thousands of innocent brown people for oil. Yet after October 7th, the same thing has happened. The government can simply call you a terrorist sympathizer for opposing genocide, kidnap you off the street, and throw you in an ICE detention center. All the while, the White House Twitter account celebrates by posting AI-generated Studio Ghibli versions of your mugshot. It's gotten to the point where anyone who says, hey, maybe Israel shouldn't be blowing up Palestinian babies, gets smeared as a Hamas terrorist sympathizer. Miss Rachel? Hamas. Reddit? Hamas. The entire country of Ireland? Hamas. The International Court of Justice? Hamas. With everyone becoming a terrorist today, it might be helpful to break down what exactly makes one a terrorist organization. Is it massacring civilians? Or systematically destroying civilian infrastructure like hospitals, universities, and apartment buildings? Or torturing people? Or starving people to death? Or murdering children? By any definition, what Israel is doing to Gaza is terrorism. Not only is it terrorism, they're openly bragging about it and posting their war crimes on TikTok for clout. It is the people who are speaking up and fighting against this that are supposedly the real terrorists. In the same post-9/11 hysteria, civil liberties and free expression are stripped from you by simply slapping the label terrorist on you. And if that doesn't work, they'll also try to say, This is another fun smear they try to put on anyone who speaks up against Israel's genocide of Palestinians. The counter argument is quite simple. Criticizing Israel is not the same as hatred of Jewish people. Opposing Zionism, a political ideology that supports the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, which necessarily entails ethnically cleansing Palestine's original inhabitants, dispossessing them of their land, and denying them of their human rights, is not the same as hating Jewish people, any more than opposing apartheid South Africa was anti-white. Certainly everyone reasonable understands this, right?
The US House of Representatives has approved a resolution equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
Alright, let's take this from the top. So Zionism originated as a thoroughly Christian idea before it ever became Jewish. After the Reformation, the idea was thrown around in Christian circles of bringing Jewish people to Palestine to fulfill biblical prophecy, bring about the second coming of Jesus Christ, and trigger the end times. A lot of these proto-Zionists were anti-Semites and believed that Jewish people could never assimilate into European society and thus needed to be shipped out of Europe. Then, when Zionism began to be spread among Jewish circles in the mid-19th century, everyone from Reform, Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, and Socialist Jews all opposed the idea for various reasons. Some of these groups eventually began to support Zionism, but it took decades, and even today, a significant number of ultra-Orthodox Jews remain anti-Zionist. This brings about another important point. Some of the largest voices protesting Israel's actions are Jewish. Jewish Voice for Peace, for example, has staged multiple actions and been arrested for protesting the genocide. A big point Zionists like to make is that a majority of Jewish people around the world support Zionism. So if you're anti-Zionist, then you're by proxy anti-Semitic because you oppose what a majority of Jewish people believe. So this fails on a few logical grounds. Christian Zionists, for example, outnumber Jewish Zionists 20 to 30-fold. Does this mean being anti-Zionist means you're by proxy Christophobic because a significant number of Christians believe in Zionism? Obviously not, because Zionism is a political ideology, not inherently tied to one religion or another. Anti-Zionists oppose Zionism because it's an ideology of ethnic supremacy that requires dispossessing, terrorizing, and ethnically cleansing Palestinians. It doesn't matter if every Jewish person or Christian person or Muslim person opposed it or supported it. The very idea of ethnic supremacy of one group of people over another is wrong in itself. Now that we've covered the big two smears used to attack anyone who criticizes Israel, I'll focus on arguments that have cropped up specifically since the start of Israel's genocide. Starting with, of course, usually, the hardest part of proving a genocide is intent. No one can deny that Israel is massacring Palestinians, mostly women and children, but the talking point goes, it's not a genocide, it's a war. They're trying to eliminate Hamas, and, mass murdering women and children is just a tragic byproduct of that goal. Of course, this falls apart when you see what Israeli politicians are saying and have been saying for over a year, that they want the complete annihilation of the Palestinian people.
מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
We shall realize the prophecy of Isaiah.
And these are only a few of the incitements to genocide made by the most prominent Israeli politicians. Law for Palestine has over 500 genocidal statements from army personnel, journalists, influencers, and former government officials, some of which were used by South Africa to prove at the International Court of Justice that Israel was committing a genocide. So when we have a state that's saying they're doing a genocide, and we also see on the ground they're doing genocide, it's no wonder that almost everyone agrees they're doing a genocide. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN, Euromed, Doctors Without Borders, and almost every genocide and Holocaust scholar agrees that Israel is committing a genocide. When one genocide scholar was asked if he could name one expert who thinks what Israel is doing in Gaza is not a genocide, he said he didn't know one. The only people for whom the genocide label is controversial are those that willfully ignore what the Israeli state says, has done, and is doing, which is why a lot of Zionist loppers have dropped the act and straight up said they support genocide. One way Zionists justify mass murdering Palestinians is that Hamas is using them as human shields. See, it's not their fault they have to blow up that baby, it's actually Hamas's fault. This talking point is used less and less now as it's become increasingly clear Israel has indiscriminately destroyed everything in the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, the human shield argument is always transparently ridiculous because there was never any proof.
We conducted several interviews, dozens of interviews with civilians and with people, Palestinians, in areas that were designated as combat zones. But we have not documented at least one case of Palestinian armed members using civilians as human shields.
Instead, what's been standard practice is Israeli soldiers using Palestinians as human shields. And you don't even have to take my word for it, we can see it with our own eyes and listen to former IDF soldiers testify that it's common practice. Rather than Palestinian civilians being human shields for an operation otherwise surgically targeting Hamas, it's civilians who are being surgically targeted. Testimony after testimony from doctors in Gaza show that the Israeli army aims for and murders children, killing them with bullets to the head or chest. Palestinians aren't human shields for Hamas, they're human targets for the IDF. Of course, Hamas has offered to free the hostages again and again, most commonly in the form of all-for-all deals, in which they'll release all their hostages in exchange for all the thousands of Palestinians arbitrarily kidnapped and held hostage in Israeli prisons. It's been the Israeli government that's rejected and sabotaged these deals, instead opting to free the hostages from life by indiscriminately bombing Gaza, including areas where the hostages are held, depriving hostages of food and water by starving the entire strip, and outright murdering hostages if they try to escape and run to Israeli forces. When Palestinian resistance forces were returning to Gaza after October 7th, Israel greenlit the Hannibal Directive and attacked vehicles carrying their own hostages. These actions are why some family members of the hostages have publicly repudiated the Israeli government, which at every turn has sabotaged the one thing that would guarantee their safe return: a deal. When short-lived hostage exchange deals are made, we can see the conditions of Palestinian and Israeli hostages. Hostages kept by Hamas are relatively okay for being hostages and happy to be released, kissing or shaking hands with their captors. Compare that with the condition of the much larger number of Palestinian hostages kept by Israel, who show clear marks of torture, assault, and starvation. Many of these hostages, by the way, are usually just random Palestinian civilians kidnapped by the IDF without any charges, despite Zionist attempts to smear them all as terrorists. Compare that with the descriptions of some hostages kept by Hamas, who are helpless innocents who happen to be kidnapped from a tank. Kidnapped my large adult son. On October 7th, Hamas terrorists kidnapped my poor baby boy from his killdozer. He will dance again. There's no evidence of mass systemic rape on October 7th. Whoa, get a load of this guy. He's a rape denier. So much for believe all women. He's actually a raging misogynist. He's a rape denying, terrorist sympathizing, communist, misogynist, anti-Semitic, and on and on and on. Zionists love to pile smears on anyone who pushes back against their propaganda. And it's an easy strategy. You just assert an atrocity without evidence, like, for example, 40 babies were beheaded by Hamas, and when you ask for proof, they pile the smears on. I mean, would you really doubt that Hamas beheaded 40 babies when Joe Biden himself said he saw proof? He's the most mentally lucid person in the world. Wow. Is this guy seriously insulting an 82-year-old man with cancer? What a baby beheading denying ageist. Of course, there was no evidence of 40 beheaded babies. It was a lie to manufacture support for the genocide Israel is currently enacting on Gaza. The same goes for allegations of mass rape. This is all atrocity propaganda, painting a picture so horrific it justifies genociding every man, woman, and child in Gaza.
It's the next stage of Israel's propaganda blitz, as Tel Aviv quickly pivoted from beheaded babies and other completely made-up atrocities to the suddenly discovered plague of systemic rape by Hamas on October 7th.
This, by the way, is not to mock or dismiss real survivors of sexual abuse, because all these months later, there's still not a single victim of mass rape on October 7th, living or dead, that can be positively identified. The New York Times article that broke the mass rape story has been thoroughly debunked, with family members of their cited victims saying they were not raped, the reporting having no prior reporting experience, and the Times podcast itself shelving an episode on the article because of factual issues. Other so-called evidence include confessions made under torture, whose reliability is rejected by multiple human rights organizations. Finally, Israel itself has obstructed investigations into mass rape on October 7th. Investigations that, despite pulling a lot of strings, did not find any convincing evidence, and in fact found that some evidence had been fabricated. Despite the lack of proof of mass systemic rape on October 7th, Israeli mass rape of Palestinian prisoners is not only well documented in, for example, a UN report entitled "More Than a Human Can Bear," but celebrated by Israelis. When a video of 10 IDF soldiers gang raping a Palestinian prisoner got released, protests broke out in Israel, not against the gang rape, but in defense of the soldiers' right to rape. Israeli politicians called these rapists heroes, and protesters stormed the prison where they were being held. This, by the way, is why Israel keeps obstructing October 7th mass rape investigations. They don't want neutral investigators to dig into their own atrocities. So yeah, Zionists aren't rape deniers, they're rape celebrators. When an endless feed of genocidal war crimes are being streamed on your phone, Israel needs a way to explain it away. The solution they came up with is that all these videos of children being blown to bits, mother murdering their babies, and children crying and being orphaned by an Israeli missile strike is that they're all staged by Pallywood. Of course, the most obvious response is that Israeli soldiers themselves openly post their war crimes for clout, blowing up homes for their mom, ransacking Palestinian homes, posing with looted lingerie, bulldozing neighborhoods, and destroying mosques. Even ignoring the fact that they're posting their own war crimes, the evidence Zionists tried out for Pallywood itself is flimsy. This footage of Palestinians faking injuries is from the set of a short film made in Lebanon. This alleged image of a Gazan texting someone in a body bag is actually a 2022 Halloween costume contest in Thailand. This alleged footage of Palestinians faking industry is actually from a zombie-themed ad filmed in Algeria, and so on and so forth, and countless examples. The genocide in Gaza is the most documented genocide in history, and claiming that hundreds of thousands of hours of footage are all faked is a sad attempt to whitewash Israel's atrocities and make a mockery of Palestinian suffering. I mean, quite literally, Israelis have taken to mocking Palestinians on social media. The great irony, of course, is that it's the Israeli side that conducts the worst hoaxes. Hey guys, so today we're going to do the world's most moral tier list of bad Israeli Hezbollah. So first we have the leaked terrorist conversation about the Al-Ali Arab hospital explosion. Wow, what a throwback. This was back when Israel first first bombed a hospital in Gaza and panicked at the international backlash, making up a fake conversation between terrorists, who conveniently said,
"Golly gee, what a shame it was our rocket, non-Israeli airstrike that blew up that hospital."
Multiple experts now have said the call was an obvious fabrication, and it's moot now that Israel's attacked every hospital in the Gaza Strip and doesn't even pretend anymore. This one's going in D tier just because of how poorly it's aged. Then we have the Hamas sign-in sheet hoax, where the IDF claimed to have found a list of terrorist names in a hospital that turned out to just be a calendar. I mean, on the one hand, this one is so lazy, but on the other, you kinda gotta respect the sheer laziness of it. This one in B tier just because it's hilarious. The Al-Shifa nurse hoax is a classic. This one is faked footage of a nurse in the Al-Shifa hospital claiming Hamas was stealing food and medicine. Of course, her accent was completely wrong, the footage reused the same explosion sound effect in the background, and staff at the hospital said they had no clue who she was. I'm putting this one in F tier. Okay, well, I think y'all get the point, but if you want a full tier list video, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell. So if you're committing a genocide, how do you downplay it? Well, as we saw before, saying that the carnage was all staged is one way of doing it. Another way is by saying the death toll numbers are fake. I mean, do you really believe the Hamas-run health ministry? They literally have Hamas in their name. Of course it's not trustworthy. Except, of course, this is wrong. When media reporting uses terms like Hamas-run health ministry, the image they try to conjure up is that of doctors with Hamas headbands screaming scary Arabic words and boosting up fake death toll numbers to generate international sympathy for their cause. The reality is that what we usually associate with Hamas, their fighters, are relegated to their military wing, the Al-Qassam brigades. Hamas is the government of Gaza, so technically any government bureaucrat, medical professional, or teacher is a quote-unquote member of Hamas, even if they were working for the government before Hamas came into power. This, by the way, is how Israel justifies murdering Gazan bureaucrats, by saying they killed a Hamas official, when what they really did was kill someone responsible for carrying out the functions of any normal government. Despite transparent attempts to smear the doctors working for the Gazan Health Ministry as terrorists, the United Nations, World Health Organization, and Human Rights Watch have all testified that their numbers are largely accurate. When looking at past death counts, the Gazan Health Ministry has never inflated numbers and been largely consistent with other independent counts. In fact, if anything, the Gazan Health Ministry is undercounting deaths. Their methodology relies on actually observing a dead body, usually in morgues, or reports from friends and family that are then verified. This is an incredibly strict process that has only been made harder by the fact that Israel has bombed and invaded hospitals, murdered hospital staff, and made the difficult job of counting the dead in the middle of a genocide even harder. As of now, the official death count is around 61,000. Roughly half are women, children, or the elderly. The 61,000 figure by the Gazan Health Ministry, as discussed earlier, is certainly an undercount. An estimate last year by The Lancet said it was likely closer to 186,000. We can only guess what the real death count is today. So in a way, the Zionists are right. The death count is inaccurate because the number of dead is probably much, much higher. This argument is a favorite thinly veiled death threat that Zionists like to use against anyone who speaks up for Palestine. I mean, just look at how precisely Israel is striking international aid workers at the World Central Kitchen. You don't think they're going to eagerly murder foreign activists going there? But despite the dangers, when pro-Palestine activists do want to break the genocidal death siege on Gaza, that, may I remind you, is starving the entire population to the extent that mothers can't even produce breast milk, which babies need for survival, Zionists suddenly switch up. Go to Gaza. Okay. I hope Israel murders you. This isn't even a hypothetical, by the way. The blockade on Gaza has tightened since 2007, with Israel strictly controlling who and what comes in and out to maintain it as an open-air prison. Activists have routinely tried to break the blockade and sail to Gaza with humanitarian aid, with one attempt in 2010 resulting in Israeli commandos murdering 10 activists and injuring dozens of others. Another attempt in 2018 resulted in activists being beaten, assaulted, and tasered. The most recent high-profile attempt this past June by Greta Thunberg and 11 other activists likely avoided being outright murdered because of the attention their fame brought them. So when the Israeli government mocks the Freedom Flotilla as a selfie yacht, what they're really complaining about is the fact that live streaming, documenting, and bringing international attention to famous activists trying to break the Gaza blockade prevented them from murdering his entire crew. Keep in mind, by the way, that all these ships were attacked and his crew kidnapped in international waters, which is illegal. We can only hope that Israel release the hostages. Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, are some of the only people in the world right now following international law and materially opposing the genocide on Gaza. They've imposed a blockade on Israel-related shipping in the Red Sea, enacting an economic cost on Israel. For doing the great crime of opposing a genocide, the Houthis have been smeared from every angle. These smears are quite easy to debunk. This documentary that supposedly proves the Houthis used slavery is actually about the previous Yemeni government. The idea that the Houthis are just pirates using the genocide as an excuse to steal from ships is dispelled by the fact that they stopped their blockade when the ceasefire was in place, and then resumed attacking ships when Israel violated the ceasefire and refused to allow aid into Gaza. And for that matter, what's wrong with being pirates against a genocide? Finally, this idea that the crew of the ships they attacked are still missing or haven't been seen is also nonsense. The Red Cross has repeatedly checked in on them, and during the brief ceasefire in January, they were later released. These smears are made because the Houthis, for all their other faults, are nevertheless one of the few parties willing to enforce the UN Charter on genocide and, actually work to stop the genocide. In 2005, Israel withdrew settlers and forces from Gaza. The physical eviction of settlers was filmed for an international audience, painting Israel as doing all it can for the peace process. In exchange, the ungrateful Palestinians embraced terrorism and continued to reject peace. This narrative, that Israel already freed Gaza, is part of a long-running myth that Israel is in any way committed to peace. For one, the 2005 withdrawal was in no way an end to Israel's occupation of Gaza. Occupation as a term in international humanitarian law is not about whether the occupying force still has boots on the ground, but whether the occupying force still has effective control over the area. And yeah, even without settlers and military bases, Israel still controls Gaza's land crossings, airspace, territorial waters, declares certain areas in Gaza as no-go zones, and exercises the power to invade and arrest Palestinians in Gaza. Using this control, they restrict the movement of food, calorie counting the bare minimum Palestinians need to survive. The bureaucratic permitting process also restricts Gazans from studying abroad, getting necessary medical care, or leaving the Strip. The conditions are so bad, Gaza is famously called the world's largest open-air prison. So why did Israel withdraw settlers and military boosts in 2005? Well, let's hear what a top aide to Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had to say about it.
The significance of the disengagement plan is the freezing of the peace process, and when you freeze that process, you prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, and you prevent a discussion on the refugees, the borders, and Jerusalem. Effectively, this whole package called the Palestinian state, with all that it entails, has been removed indefinitely from our agenda.
So the 2005 withdrawal was basically a way to kill a Palestinian state and refocus efforts at annexing the West Bank. Whenever anyone opposed growing settlements in the West Bank, Israel could point to the image of poor Gazan settlers being evicted and say that they sacrificed so much for peace. In addition, the settlers themselves were posing problems, and evicting them allowed Israel to better lob missiles into Gaza without harming Israelis. They do. Nonviolent resistance is the first option Palestinians have historically used, but it's Israel that responds with disproportionate violence. In the West Bank, attending political gatherings of more than 10 people or displaying flags or symbols is punishable by up to 10 years. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the 2018 to 2019 Great March of Return was a grassroots protest that was overwhelmingly peaceful and unarmed. Demonstrators protested along the Gaza border wall, and in response, Israeli forces opened fire.
Of the 183 fatalities caused by sniper fire investigated by the UN Commission, 171 were clearly murdered, shot in the head or torso. Nearly 8,000 people were wounded by live ammunition. Over that 8-month period, 21 were left permanently paralyzed, and 122 more required limb amputations, including 20 children. In stark contrast, the UN report found 0 fatalities on the Israeli side. Not one Israeli soldier was killed or seriously wounded.
Zionists love to complain about the lack of a Palestinian Gandhi, but they keep murdering all of them. This aggressive response to peaceful protests even extends to the international arena. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is by definition peaceful, but it's been demonized as anti-Semitic and criminalized in some form in a majority of US states. The Make America Great Again folks sure won't like it when they realize all their politicians are actually bought and paid for by the Zionist lobby. So what happens when all forms of peaceful resistance are violently suppressed? Obviously, people turn to violent resistance. And if people are caged into an open-air prison for decades, massacred in routine assaults every few years, and denied the possibility of a better future, well, they'll do anything to break out of that prison. A common framing from liberal Zionists is that the problem is the Israeli government, not the Israeli people. Sometimes they go as far as to lay the blame only on Netanyahu, excusing other Israeli officials even if they've also been active architects of the genocide. So Netanyahu fired this guy, Gazan Obliterator 69, a really good guy. He was a moderating voice in the government, especially when he said, "Wow, what a voice of moral clarity. Isn't that right, babe?" Supermajorities of the Israeli public have consistently shown support for the genocide. In February of this year, a poll found approximately 7 out of 10 Israelis supported ethnically cleansing Gazans. The only point of contention was whether ethnic cleansing was practical or not. Another poll from last March found 82% of Jewish Israelis supported expulsion, and 47% supported killing all Palestinians in Gaza outright. Even beyond Gaza, a majority of Jewish Israelis support expelling Palestinian citizens within Israel. Don't just take my word for it, listen to what Israelis were saying even before October 7th.
I'm think that we need to... איך אומרים לאיש בערבית? כן, תגידי לי את המילה הזאת.
I don't think there's any answer to it. Really? There's only one way, like, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it.
They took this land, and this is our land now, and I don't think there should be here no Arabs.
This isn't to say that brave anti-Zionist and anti-genocide Israelis don't exist. There are certainly courageous individuals who, for example, act as shield for Palestinians being beaten by racist mobs. But according to anti-Zionist Israelis themselves, they're a tiny minority within an overwhelmingly genocidal society. The problem isn't Netanyahu or a few bad apples in the Israeli government. The problem runs much deeper, and much longer, long before. All the arguments I've addressed so far have been primarily pushed in response to October 7th, but if we start and end with October 7th, that would be tacitly accepting a frame that Zionists themselves push, that on October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,200 Israelis for no reason other than that they hate Jews. For a lot of Zionists, October 7th justifies everything.
Don't cry about a war you couldn't finish,
they say while running to their bomb shelters after unilaterally bombing Iran. But where did Gaza come from? Where did Hamas come from? And why did Palestinian resistance fighters have to break out of these walls that just randomly happen to be there? Gaza is a tiny strip of land, slightly more than 2% of the landmass of Palestine. It's 25 miles long and around 6 miles wide and one of the most densely populated places in the world. The reason it's so densely populated goes back to 1947 and 1948, to the founding of Israel. For decades before 1947, the Zionist movement had built up support from the British Empire to take over the land of Palestine and build a Jewish state. The problem was, of course, that Palestine already had inhabitants, Palestinians, who didn't want to be displaced from their own homes. By 1947 to 48, however, the Zionist movement solved this problem with one easy trick: ethnic cleansing. They simply ruthlessly kicked out Palestinians, demolished Palestinian villages, and pushed them all into the surrounding countries of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the two Palestinian territories that exist today. Israel occupied both territories after the 1967 war and enforced increasingly harsh repression over the decades. In the West Bank, Israel has established settlements that are recognized internationally as illegal in preparation for full annexation. Gaza, meanwhile, suffers from a blockade tightened by Israel since 2007 while being routinely massacred in mowing the grass operations. Conditions in Gaza have only deteriorated. 71% of the population are refugees, 81% live below the poverty line, 64% are food insecure, and nearly half are children. This is all according to the Israeli government's plan, of course. They had long adopted a policy of divide and conquer, supporting Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank to ensure Palestinians remained politically divided, impoverished, and desperate. The story of Israel-Palestine is the age-old story of settler colonialism. Zionists ethnically cleansed Palestinians from their land, occupied the remaining territories, and kept them in a state of political division and desperation. As Netanyahu said, "We control the height of the flames." October 7th exposed that they did not, in fact, control the height of the flames. October 7th was not a burst of inexplicable terrorism. It was the inevitable result of dispossessing, besieging, occupying, and colonizing a people for decades. Now that we're moving beyond the October 7th framework into broader arguments, the stereotypical of Israel-Palestine is that the conflict is a 1,000-year-old clash of civilizations between Jews and Muslims who both hold claims to the same land. For many Americans influenced by Islamophobia, they see all Muslims as terrorists, so it's easy to choose which side to support in this eternal fight. But the conflict is not an eternal religious conflict, but a modern colonial one. Zionism proper began in the mid-19th century. The first Zionist conference was in 1897, and Israel itself was established in 1948. KFC, microwaves, rocket ships, Nintendo, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump are all older than the state of Israel. What talking points like this do is obscure the nature of the conflict. It's not an age-old religious battle between Muslims and Jews. In fact, the land of Palestine was historically a multi-religious society, with Muslims, Jews, and Christians all living together during Ottoman rule. What Zionism did was claim that the entire land, already populated with a thriving, multi-religious Arab society, belonged entirely to Jewish people. To pursue that goal, Zionists settled mostly European Jews and ethnically cleansed their indigenous inhabitants of Palestine. Decades of dispossession, violence, denial of basic human rights, and now outright genocide were and are necessary to ensure that an originally Arab society became settled and replaced with the Jewish supremacist ethno-state. And this, of course, happened in the last 100 years, hardly an internal conflict. To quote from the Israeli historian Ilhan Pape,
"The last paradox is that the tale of Palestine, from the beginning until today, is a simple story of colonialism and dispossession. Yet, the world treats it as a multifaceted and complex story, hard to understand and even harder to solve. Indeed, the story of Palestine has been told before. European settlers coming to a foreign land, settling there, and either committing genocide against or expelling the indigenous people. The Zionists have not invented anything new in this respect, but Israel succeeded nonetheless, with the help of its allies everywhere, in building a multi-layered explanation that is so complex that only Israel can understand it. Any interference from the outside world is immediately castigated as naive at best, or anti-Semitic at worst."
Despite most of them not being religious, the earliest Zionists realized that the Bible was a convenient justification to colonize Palestine. Turns out you can get away with a lot when the big guy upstairs is okay with it. According to this logic, the Jewish people were promised the land of Palestine 3,000 years ago, and so it's actually okay to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. There are a few problems with this, of course, namely that you can't just steal someone's home by saying God promised me this home 3,000 years ago. I mean, every colonial movement has justified colonization in one way or the other by saying God promised me this land. But beyond that obvious point, the early Zionists looked at alternative places to colonize and create a Jewish state. Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, considered Uganda, areas in North and South of America, and Azerbaijan. You're really telling me that God promised Uganda to the Jewish people 3,000 years ago? A common argument from Zionists is that it's not settler colonialism. Actually, they say, Zionism can't be colonialism because the Jewish people were there first. They were exiled by the Romans, and Israel is simply a national liberation. No, a decolonization movement, returning Jewish people to their homeland. See that settler from New York stealing a Palestinian home in the West Bank? This is what decolonization looks like. The most obvious counterargument is that the founders of Zionism themselves openly said that they wanted to colonize Palestine, labeled themselves as colonizers, wrote that they wanted to expel the indigenous Palestinians by force, and made friends with some of the biggest colonizers of their time. Then after World War II, when colonization became a dirty word, Zionism rebranded and it's now unfashionable to talk about Zionism as colonialism. But aren't Jewish people indigenous to the land of Palestine? The Romans kicked them out, and Zionism is simply returning the descendants of this Jewish diaspora to their rightful homeland. Now I could go the route of deconstructing this historical Zionist argument, that multiple genetic studies show that Palestinians and Israelis share common ancestry, that there's no evidence of a mass Roman exile of Jewish people, that many lower-class Jewish people stayed in the land, converting to Christianity, then Islam following their Arab conquest in some century, and that, as Shlomo Sand concludes, many Palestinians today are likely descendants of ancient Judeans. But let's put all that aside and pretend everything about the Zionist historical narrative is true. So what? Just because your ancestors supposedly lived in the land thousands of years ago gives you justification to ethnically cleanse the people currently living in the land today? It's a ridiculous argument. Do the Italians deserve the right to colonize the lands of the entire former Roman Empire because their ancestors lived there in the past? Indigeneity isn't about who lived on a land thousands of years ago. It's a relationship imposed by colonialism. The indigenous colonized who are dispossessed versus the colonizer who dispossesses. And when you're actively displacing people, murdering them, stealing their homes, bulldozing their towns, and committing a genocide, you are the colonizer. At least the early Zionists had the courtesy to embrace the term. The problem with this argument is that Zionism and efforts to colonize Palestine, as I talked about before, long predate the Holocaust. But even ignoring that, why should Palestinians pay the price for a European genocide they had nothing to do with? Does suffering through persecution justify persecuting random other people? Many settler colonial projects were started by people who were persecuted. Some of the first American colonizers were Puritans fleeing persecution in England. Liberia was colonized by former enslaved Africans in the Americas. Persecution doesn't give you a get out of settler colonialism for free card, and suffering through a genocide certainly doesn't give you free rein to commit a genocide. Israel is objectively the least safe place for Jewish people right now, and has been the only place where Jewish people have been killed in large numbers since its founding in 1948. Because obviously, if your society is built on ethnic cleansing, dispossession, and terror of another people, the people you're terrorizing will resist regardless of who their oppressors are. This is why the idea that Palestinians are uniquely anti-Semitic falls flat. If your home was stolen from you and you've been stripped of basic necessities to live a peaceful life, you would fight back regardless if your oppressors were Christian Europeans like in the United States, French like in Algeria, or pathetic losers like in Rhodesia. Israel was founded on the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in 1947-48, which displaced around 750,000 of them in the Nakba, or catastrophe. The fact that Zionists ethnically cleansed Palestinians is a bit inconvenient for their narrative, so they do their best to find excuses for what they did. A common historical argument is that actually the Palestinians voluntarily left because Arab leaders told them to. They would leave, the Arab leaders would invade, kick out the Israelis, and then the Palestinians would return. The problem is, there's no evidence for any of this. Source? I made it up. So, the Zionists aren't off to a good start here. But okay, what if the Palestinians weren't ethnically cleansed, but actually just fleeing a war? I mean, the Israeli War of Independence involved the brave Zionist military fighting off 7 Arab armies. This too is a myth. The first stage of the Nakba occurred before the intervention of Arab armies, starting on November 30th, 1947, with about 300,000 Palestinians displaced from massacres and devastation wrought by Zionist forces against Palestinian cities. The Arab armies, of which there were really only 5 mostly poorly equipped forces, intervened only after news of these initial massacres. After they were defeated, another 400,000 Palestinians were expelled. So even before the Arab armies waged war, the Zionists were already ethnically cleansing Palestinians. Okay, so they weren't told to leave by their leaders or were refugees of war, but what if they actually deserved it. The final and most desperate argument Zionists tried to make is that the Nakba was a retaliatory ethnic cleansing. See, the Arab countries ethnically cleansed Jews around the same time, so it's only fair the Zionists ethnically cleanse Palestinians. So there's a few things wrong with this logic. First, Palestinians are not Egyptians, Syrians, or any other Arab country. They had nothing to do with Jewish expulsions in these countries, and in fact called for their return. Second, Jewish expulsions and flights from Arab countries occurred over many decades and were in fact stoked by Israel. In Yemen, Israel bribed and convinced local rulers to deport Jews to Israel, sometimes even kidnapping their children. Moroccan Jews were kidnapped by force in a deal between French colonial authorities and the Jewish Agency. In Iraq, the Mossad launched false flags to terrorize Iraqi Jews into leaving the country. Israel ethnically cleansed Palestinians and then stoked the expulsion of Jews from surrounding countries to build up its Jewish ethno-state. This was not a tit-for-tat situation where one group expelled the other, but one long continuous project of Zionist ethnic supremacy. So there's this clip from this racist US president accused of sexual assault and associated with Epstein that captures the sentiment of this talking point perfectly. Bill Clinton.
And all they know is that a lot more Palestinians have been killed than Israelis. And I tell them what Arafat walked away from. And they can't believe it. I said, oh yeah, he walked away from a Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem, 96% of the West Bank, 4% of Israel. You walk away from these once-in-a-lifetime peace opportunities, and you can't complain 25 years later when the doors weren't all still open and all the possibilities weren't still there. You can't do it. It's just...
Yeah, you heard that right. Palestinians may be going through a genocide right now, but they have no right to complain. Children dying. The most important thing that died was this deal I tried to make. William Clinton's genocidal narcissism aside, is it true that Camp David offered Palestinians a state and that they ungratefully rejected it? No, of course not. Israeli Prime Minister Rabin literally said they were offering less than a state to the Palestinians. The proposed Palestinian quote-unquote state would not have control over its economic policy, foreign policy, no control over its airspace, have 3 permanent Israeli military installations, and Israel would be allowed to invade the area at any time. This wouldn't be self-determination, but rather a continuation of occupation by a different name. Of course, famous respecter of consent and autonomy Bill Clinton would still be complaining about someone saying no decades later. A foundational Israeli myth is that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. Palestinians, in fact, don't exist. They're all just Arabs or transient people or simply made up by anti-Semites who hate Israel. And with a Thanos snap of their finger, Zionists have solved the conflict. You can't be committing a genocide against people who don't exist. This, of course, is obviously wrong. For one, we can see Palestinians and their long ties to the land. The land between the Mediterranean Sea and Jordan River has been called Palestine for over 3,000 years. Before Zionists settled the land, Palestine was a thriving, multi-religious, culturally rich society from exposure to the wider Ottoman Empire. Predominantly rural, but increasingly urban, Palestinians were already developing a nationalist conscience under the Ottomans. Zionist settlers didn't make the desert bloom. Instead, they stole the land of other people, already thriving with indigenous wildlife and crops, planted highly flammable invasive trees, and made the desert bloom with wildfires. The existence of Palestinians is inconvenient to the Zionist narrative, that people lived on the land that they're currently settling. What happened to those people? Well, they've been ethnically cleansed to increasingly smaller strips of land, deprived of human dignity, and now suffer through an ongoing genocide. Zionists not only want to deny Palestinians of their land and their lives, but of their history as well.
Communism has never worked, except in this place.
Welcome to Israel!
Okay, that's it. Communism cancelled. I was okay with Stalin and Mao, but Israel, this has gone too far. So the argument goes that Israeli kibbutzim are examples of communist utopias. Kibbutz are basically
a community of people who share everything. They share the cars, they share the common spaces, and they even share the businesses.
Everything belongs to everyone.
So if you support socialism or communism, then you should support Israel and its kibbutzim. This, of course, ignores the fact that they're built on destroyed Palestinian villages, deliberately formed to exclude Palestinian labor, and established to promote ethnic supremacy. The kibbutz originated from a time in Israel when there was at least an undercurrent of left-wing thought with movements like labor Zionism or socialist Zionism. But as Israel has become increasingly fanatical in its ethnic cleansing alongside the rise of religious Zionism, the Israeli population and government have become more and more far-right, culminating into what we have today, a people and government fully behind a genocide against the Palestinian people. This type of talking point is to try to virtue signal to progressives outside Israel, saying, hey, if you're a leftist, you should really support our project of ethnic cleansing. Another talking point like this is the classic Okay, let's go through the list of Palestinians in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. So in Israel, Palestinian citizens are barred from purchasing roughly 90% of the land, excluded from the right of return, and their political participation is limited by vaguely worded laws that end up disqualifying Palestinian candidates for simply advocating for equality. In addition, because they're exempt from service in the IDF, Palestinian citizens in Israel are severely restricted from receiving government assistance as workers, students, parents, couples, and face barriers to housing and employment with 70% of the Israeli industry close to them. And the illegally occupied West Bank, things are even worse. Palestinians are under military law, subject to being randomly kidnapped, tortured, and beaten by Israeli soldiers for unspecified amounts of time. Meanwhile, their homes can straight up be stolen or blocked off, and violent settler mobs can beat you up with the tacit support of the Israeli military. Apartheid is so open in the West Bank, there are literal Arab-only and Israeli-only roads. And Gaza, of course, has been subject to a genocidal siege for over a decade and now suffers through an open genocide by the Zionist entity, whether relegating Palestinians to second-class citizenship, subjecting them to draconian military rule, or openly massacring them. The debate shouldn't be whether or not Israel is a democracy, but what type of non-democracy it is. Ethnocracy, apartheid state, settler colonialism, take your pick. Zionists, much like their segregated Arab-only and Israeli-only rows in the West Bank, love to segregate acceptable and non-acceptable phrases for the pro-Palestine movement. The no-no phrases are bad, anti-Semitic, and, dare I say, genocidal. Of course, not actually genocidal in terms of the genocide being carried out against Gaza, but like hypothetically genocidal, which is worse. One of these phrases is, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," basically calling for a free Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. According to Zionists, this phrase is genocidal because it's calling for the genocide of Jewish Israelis from the river to the sea. Of course, what it's really saying is, freedom from the river to the sea, which means the end of occupation, apartheid, and the genocide currently being carried out. Zionists are really letting the cat out of the bag by saying it as it is, that freedom is incompatible with the Israeli project. Of course, like Zionists do, they steal this Palestinian call for freedom for themselves, and when they say it, they do mean it in a genocidal way, and not just hypothetically too, because they're actually also doing a genocide right now. Another no-no phrase, according to Zionists, is globalized intifada, which is allegedly a call to terrorism against Jewish people. See, how this works is that intifada is an Arabic word, and Arabic is obviously a scary terrorist language, and anyone who uses it must also be a scary terrorist.
Intifada, globalized.
Intifada, of course, is just an Arabic word that means uprising. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, for example, translates to the Warsaw Ghetto Intifada. And despite the US Holocaust Museum denouncing the phrase, they themselves used Intifada on their website a few years ago. It's only now, when Zionists have all decided the word goes to the no-no segregation zone, did they scrub it out. And that's the thing with Zionists. They not only smear you, spread genocidal misinformation, and lie, but now they also try to police acceptable language, as if the ones committing a genocide deserve a say in how the opponents of that genocide express their opposition. Why do the feelings of Zionists matter more than the lives of Palestinians who are actively being massacred?
Beep boop. Lazy Zionist arguments detected. Initiating speed round debunking.
No. Good. No, it doesn't. But what if you were gay in Gaza? John Fetterman? Get out of here. Shoo, shoo. "3 months of prison, or shoot a toddler in the head." Israel is a settler colonial state built on a logic of expansion. For decades, Zionists have dreamed not only of occupying Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, but also parts of Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan in a greater Israel. And right now, it's pursuing that dream not only by committing genocide against Gaza, but also waging war on its neighbors. What supporters of the two-state solution fail to understand is that the land from the river to the sea is already under the control of one state: Israel. Israel has increasingly made the two-state solution impossible. Netanyahu himself brags about it. They've increased settlements in the West Bank, already have plans to settle Gaza, and now want to expand the borders of Israel by taking more and more land. That's the thing with colonialism. It's never enough. Even if it means committing a genocide live-streamed in front of the whole world, dragging the entire region into war, and constructing a mountain of corpses, Israel will continue to act with impunity as long as Western governments and the international community continue to do nothing, or worse, actively aid and abet its crimes against humanity. Within Israel, there's no political will for a two-state solution. Remember the alleged peace deal Bill Clinton touted that, in reality, only gave the Palestinians a sham state with no real sovereignty? The Israeli prime minister who started negotiation efforts on that was 360 no-scoped by a Zionist terrorist who thought that giving the Palestinians even the tiniest breadcrumb was too much. The idea of a two-state solution gets paraded every once in a while, like Weekend at Biden's, but it's a farce. On the ground, there isn't any hope of a two-state solution, and there hasn't been for a long time. So, what's the solution? It's simple: ending colonization, apartheid, and the continued dispossession of Palestinians. If we have to advocate for a solution, we should advocate for the one that dismantles, once and for all, the colonialism that serves as the foundation of the conflict. Something Zionists can't seem to comprehend is why millions of people resonate with the Palestinian liberation movement. Why do so many, month after month, march in the streets, demand their government stop supporting Israel, and take action to halt Israel's war in Gaza? What they don't understand is that what makes the solidarity movement powerful is a shared sense of humanity. In his discourse on colonialism, Amy Césaire talks about the effects of colonization on the colonizer.
They prove that colonization, I repeat, dehumanizes even the most civilized man. That colonial activity, colonial enterprise, colonial conquest, which is based on contempt for the native and justified by that contempt, inevitably tends to change him who undertakes it. That the colonizer, who in order to ease his conscience, gets into the habit of seeing the other man as an animal, accustoms himself to treating him like an animal, and tends objectively to transform himself into an animal.
Zionists, to put it simply, cannot see the humanity of Palestinians. They're animals, terrorists, inhuman, and this is what they have to tell themselves to justify their colonial project.
Half of Gaza are children. You want them to die?
I want to bomb Gaza, I want to make it a mall.
In doing so, they remove themselves from the humanity that binds all of us together. For the rest of us not tied to the Zionist colonial project, we can see things clearly. That the Palestinians, being starved to death, massacred by Zionist soldiers, buried under the rubble and displaced again and again on this man-made hell on earth, are deserving of life just as much as anyone else. Mohsen Al-Khatib was a Palestinian digital artist from Gaza. After getting a degree in mathematics, she took up art as a hobby over the years, and eventually made it into a career despite the Israeli siege. Although Gaza lacked funding or space, she worked as a freelancer and finally made it to the pinnacle of her career, investing her life savings into an office and fulfilling her dream of independence only weeks before the genocide started. Israeli bombs destroyed that office, and many of her art tools, devices, and sketches. Nevertheless, she continued to draw and document life during genocide. This was the final piece of art she posted, commemorating the murder of 19-year-old Shaban al-Dalu at Al-Aqsa Hospital, captioned, "We are burning." Hours later, Mohsen Al-Khatib was murdered in an airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp on October 18, 2024. All of this is still visible on her Instagram, where you can see her dreams cut short by the Israeli genocide. Always pray for me, and do not forget me. I do not want to be another number on the news ticker. I'm a story. I'm also a digital artist. Just like her, I got my degree in a completely unrelated field, but I decided to try following my dreams making illustrations out here on the internet. And it's not fair. It's not fair that her life was cut short. It's not fair that Palestinians are massacred day in, day out, deprived of their safety, of their dreams, of their lives. Among the martyrs, we all see reflections of ourselves. The children who dream, the students who aspire, the adults who nurture, who can see with their eyes that they're just deserving of life as us, because they are us. Humanity is why the Palestinian liberation struggle resonates. It is the Zionists who, in the course of colonization, deprive themselves of this humanity. On the 7th day of the genocide, Electronic Intifada released a roundtable discussion with the renowned poet Rafat El-Arir, who would be murdered less than 2 months later. On the episode, one of the hosts tells El-Arir,
I don't know how to face you and to face people in Gaza. And I don't know how to say to you that I'm sorry we failed.
Thank you, Ali. I think we didn't fail. We did not. And that's when it comes to end. No, we didn't. We didn't submit to their barbarity. We didn't submit to their brutality. And even when Gaza, this attack came when Gaza was in its weakest time possible. Look at what they did to the most invincible army in the area, the fourth strongest army in the world. The humiliation. But it's not only about that. This is not where we get our pride. We get our pride from staying principled at a time when everybody is not. I saw a friend trashing somebody, saying, like, he was posting some anti-Semitic stuff on Twitter, replying, with anti-Semitic things, and he was like, "Don't do this. We're not them." And I was very proud. It is at this time that people their mettle can be tested, who they are, their character. Those people failed miserably. We didn't.
I began this video with a joke. Who in their right mind would take on Zionism when they have the backing of the political establishment, a powerful lobby, active disinformation efforts, and slop streamers? But the fact is, ordinary people get the bravery to take them on every day. Zionists rely on spreading misinformation. They have Hezbollah fellowships and manuals to build an army of propagandists ready to defend Israel from the babies they massacre. For a long time, the sophisticated organization of the Zionist lobby helped to bolster Israel, providing them cover while they dispossess, ethnically cleansed, and subjugated Palestinians. But now, as they commit genocide so openly and brazenly, massacring dozens of Palestinians day after day, the walls of propaganda have started to crumble. In a way, it's a good sign that pro-Palestine activists are getting repressed. It shows that it's working. Support for Israel has tumbled around the world, even among the population of its primary backer, the United States. Now, rather than eagerly throating Zionist slop, politicians have to carefully chew it before trying to present it to a more Israel-skeptic public. But let's be real. These are rookie numbers. The walls of Zionist propaganda are falling, but they need to be torn down faster. And it's not enough to tear down the walls of Zionist propaganda, but the walls of Zionist occupation. Seeing the humanity of Palestinians is not enough. We have to fight for that humanity. Unfortunately, the fight for an end to the genocide and free Palestine will be a protracted one. But for the sake of Palestinians, we must continue to fight. Be unapologetic when responding to Zionist smears and defending the Palestinian resistance. Whoever is in solidarity with their corpses but not our rockets is a hypocrite and not one of us. Continue to participate in protests, join organizations, and engage in the diversity of tactics that have characterized the Palestine solidarity movement. Palestine has exposed that the ideals of democracy, equality, and human rights that supposedly characterize Western governments and international institutions are a sham. We can only hope that in the ruins of our institutions, we can build something better. Thank you so much for watching. Linked in the description is a transcript of the video with my sources. I also have various donation pages to Palestine linked, especially funds directly to families in Gaza. I'd also like to give a special thanks to folks who loaned out their voices for this video, Ugopnik, Bestie Marks, and Hakeem. Please check out their channels as well as Hugo and Hakeem's other channel, First Thought. It goes without saying that any failings to this video do not fall on them. I'd also like to re-emphasize the importance of political action. As much as donating to families in Gaza helps, we also need to work now to end the genocide and hold our governments and institutions responsible for aiding and abetting this horrific crime against humanity. In terms of where I've been, sorry for being gone for for 5 years. I've been getting my degree, but now I'm graduated, and I would hopefully like to get back to making YouTube videos full-time. If you want to support me, I just started Patreon. Thank you for sticking around all these years, and as always, no war but the class war.
Nos acusa a mí me acusan de patrocinar el terrorismo. Son ellos los que patrocinan el terrorismo. Aprovecho para condenar de nuevo, desde el fondo de mi alma y de mis vísceras, al Estado de Israel. Maldito seas, Estado de Israel. Maldito seas, terroristas y asesinos. Y viva el pueblo palestino. Pueblo heroico, pueblo bueno.